Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thanks for noticing me jumping up to my feet with great rapidity. I'd like to congratulate the honourable gentleman and also my honourable friend for securing this critically important debate. I'd also like to declare that I spent some time, over a year myself, living and working in Sierra Leone as Director of the British Council there, and 4 years at the World Economic Forum, that of course deals with many of the issues that we're discussing here today. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Sustainable Development Goals represent a vitally important set of targets that the international community must achieve if we are to secure a future based on durable and inclusive growth. This House knows that every one of the Sustainable Development Goals is critical, but today I would like to concentrate on Sustainable Development Goal number 13, which focuses on combating climate change and its impacts. The first point to establish here is that there is no longer any reasonable doubt about the science of climate change. The IPCC is a gathering of the world's 1,000 most eminent climate scientists, and they have made it absolutely clear that human activity is causing global warming. Indeed, as Lord Deben, once of the benches opposite, the chairman and now the chairman of the UK Committee on Climate Change, has stated, the connection between global warming and human activity is now as clear as the connection between smoking and lung cancer. Mr. Speaker, human activity is the problem, and human activity must therefore provide the solutions if we are to prevent a rise of at least 3.2 degrees in the global temperatures by 2100, the consequences of which would be all too real. The seas rising because the ice caps are melting, heat waves more frequent, and as we've seen very close to home, flooding and extreme weather on the up. If nothing is done, we can expect more droughts and floods affecting food security and global poverty, hitting the poorest countries with the lowest CO2 emissions hardest. We can expect seawater to become more acidic, affecting biodiversity and once again food security. We can expect the sea levels to rise between 0.5 and 1.5 metres, displacing more than 100 million people, dwarfing the current tragic refugee crisis. Put simply, if we are to have any chance of meeting the 17 Sustainable Development Goals before us, we have to start with a serious, actionable, large-scale plan to tackle climate change. Climate change is, of course, tragically topical because all signs point towards the refugee crisis becoming increasingly acute as conditions in the global south become worse through drought and severe weather. This was put succinctly by Jamie Drummond of One only yesterday. He said, in our analysis, there are three extremes: extreme poverty, extreme climate, and extreme ideology that risk taking over certain parts of the world. And if we do not have a pretty enlightened and aggressive long-term investment strategy, future flows of refugees will increase exponentially. If we are going to feed the world, as the SDGs compel us to do, you need farmers and farmland, much of which is threatened by rising sea levels, desertification and acidification due to climate change. If you own an agri-business and those farmers work for you, it won't be a case of smaller profit margins, it will be the end of your business, of your livelihood and theirs. If you're a coastal city as vast as New York, or a coastal town indeed, such as the town of Port Talbot in my constituency of Aberavon, both reliant to differing degrees on tourism and coastal industries, then your economy and eventually your very existence will be threatened. Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned at the start of my intervention, I worked for the World Economic Forum for 4 years. During that time, I was privy to the thoughts of CEOs and leaders of some of the world's largest companies, and most had the same message: your business is not sustainable if your planet is not sustainable. The Sustainable Development Goals give us the opportunity to now inspire businesses and governments to reinvent growth. Growth of the right sort that does not lead to the impoverishment of billions of people or the destruction of our planet. And public-private partnership is the key to this reinvention. And I do therefore deeply regret the government's decisions around the renewable energy subsidies, and I would urge that they be reconsidered. But I do welcome the fact that the SDGs as a whole are more business-oriented than the MDGs were. There are more references to job creation and sustainable growth, both of which can be achieved by business and governments investing in green technology and energy innovation. As for their part, businesses must accept and embrace their responsibility to commit to those measures, even though many of them will be regulatory and could be spun by short-termists as burdensome. And whilst aid will be necessary for some of the goals, and I would never advocate cuts to ODA, of course, combating climate change will require investment, large-scale, both public, private, first and foremost. Supporting and... Yes, of course.
I'm extremely grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way, and he's making a very important speech. But this debate is about the Sustainable Development Goals, but I wonder whether he agrees with me that in achieving those goals, it's absolutely critical when one comes to climate change that there is a proper and an enforceable agreement at the Paris summit later this year, and that is part and parcel of the solution to the issue with which the SDGs seek to grapple.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I would have absolutely agree with that, and I do therefore underline the importance of us leading by example on that, which is why I mentioned, I think, some of the regrettable decisions that have been made about removing subsidies for renewables, but nevertheless the Paris discussions and the SDGs mesh together, and I completely support the view, and I do hope that we will show leadership in Paris in the coming months. Supporting and enabling sustainably minded business is the key to generating significant wealth, both at home and abroad. And with that in mind, I would like to finish by saying that there will be necessarily be trade-offs, and this will be a real test of the government's dedication to and understanding of the Sustainable Development Goals. Climate change is a classic example of such trade-offs. In the short term, fossil fuel companies are likely to perceive themselves as losers. Even in the end, the results are a net improvement for society and the global economy in general. Effective leadership from all concerned government departments will be necessary, and innovative solutions will have to be found. Can I therefore urge the government to take very seriously the following 5 recommendations? First, reversing the recently announced cuts to renewable energy subsidies. Second, investing in renewable infrastructure and the research capabilities required to secure them. Third, attach climate change conditions to overseas aid, particularly when it's directed to infrastructure projects. Fourth, convene a global sustainability summit to develop a roadmap for public-private partnerships for sustainable growth. And fifth, reform the Companies Act to ensure that the articles of incorporation of any given company must include a commitment to what the World Business Council for Sustainable Development calls triple bottom line reporting, namely people, planet, profit. This means that the performance of a company would no longer then just be measured in terms of its short-term profitability, but also in terms of its commitment to fulfilling its societal and environmental obligations. If the government could adopt these 5 recommendations, Madam Deputy Speaker, then I believe that as a country we would be well on the way to showing real leadership and a real contribution to achieving Sustainable Development Goal number 13.